retired, expecting my phone to ring. It didn't. At first, I blamed everyone else. The guys I'd spent decades working with. The friends who used to call every weekend. The people who promised, "Don't disappear on us, Jack." Funny how retirement changes the meaning of that sentence. 3 months went by before I admitted something I didn't want to admit. Nobody had actually disappeared. Life had. I'm Jack, 64 years old, married 38 years, retired maintenance supervisor at a paper mill. If you'd asked me before retirement what I was looking forward to, I'd have had the answer ready. Fishing, coffee on the back porch, helping my son with projects around the house, seeing old friends whenever I felt like it. After 41 years of alarm clocks and shift changes, I thought I was finally getting my life back. Instead, I kept looking at my phone. The first week felt like a vacation. Everybody called. Co-workers, neighbors, even people I hadn't talked to in years. Lunch invitations, congratulations, retirement jokes. I figured this was what life was going to look like. Then Monday came. Nobody called. Tuesday? Nothing. Wednesday? Still quiet. I didn't think much of it. People get busy. So I picked up the phone and called Rick. Rick and I had worked together almost 20 years. He answered on the second ring. "Jack!" We talked for 15 minutes, mostly about work, who got promoted, which machine broke down 2 days after I left, the usual stuff. Before hanging up, he said, "We need to grab lunch soon." Absolutely. Neither of us picked a day. At the time, I didn't notice. The next week, I called Mike. Week after that, Steve. Then my cousin Alan. Every conversation ended the same way. "Let's get together." "Definitely." "Soon." Soon never showed up. One afternoon, my wife, Linda, found me sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. "You waiting for somebody?" I looked up. "No." She smiled. "You've checked your phone 3 times. "Have I?" "You have." I laughed it off. "Just seeing if Rick got back to me." She nodded, didn't argue. Linda never rushed people into the truth. She just left the door open till they walked through it themselves. A month later, I decided to stop calling first. Not because I was angry, mostly because I was curious. I wanted to know something. If I stayed quiet, who'd notice? The first day felt almost peaceful. The second, a little strange. By the end of the first week, I started carrying my phone from room to room. Not because I expected it to ring, because I didn't want to miss it if it did. Funny how quick a man can get attached to a silence. One Saturday morning, I was cleaning the garage when I found an old folding chair covered in sawdust. Rick had borrowed it years ago for his daughter's graduation party. Never gave it back. I laughed to myself. I'd forgotten where it came from. I texted him. "Found your chair. Want it back?" He replied 20 minutes later. "Sure. I'll swing by tomorrow if that's okay." Right on time, Sunday afternoon, his pickup rolled into my driveway. He loaded the chair into the bed. We talked maybe 4 minutes. Weather, his grandson, my tomatoes. Then he shut the tailgate. "Appreciate it." "No problem." He climbed into the truck, started the engine, and drove off. I stood in the driveway longer than I needed to, not because he'd done anything wrong, because somewhere inside me, I'd expected him to say, "You got time for coffee?" or "Come by the house sometime." Anything. Instead, the driveway got quiet again. That evening, I pulled the retirement photo off the bookshelf, the one everybody at work had signed. Never really read all the messages. I started from the top. "Don't be a stranger. We'll keep in touch. Call anytime. See you on the golf course. I smiled, not because the messages were funny, because I realized every person who wrote them probably meant every word on that day. Life just kept moving after mine changed. Linda walked into the room carrying 2 cups of tea. She looked at the picture in my hands. You finally opened it? Yeah. She sat beside me. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, she asked, "Can I tell you what I think?" "Always." "I don't think you're lonely." I looked at her. "No." She shook her head. "I think you're grieving." "Grieving what?" She reached over and rested her hand on mine. "The life you thought retirement was going to be." I wanted to tell her she was wrong. Instead, I looked back at the signatures. For the first time, I wasn't wondering why nobody was calling. I was wondering whether I'd been expecting a chapter of my life to keep going after it had already ended. For the next couple weeks, I stuck to my little experiment. No calls, no texts, no checking in first. At first, I almost reached for my phone out of habit. You don't realize how many friendships run on routine till you stop supplying the routine. Every afternoon, I tell myself the same thing. Maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow kept coming. The phone stayed quiet. One Thursday, my son David stopped by after work. He found me in the garage pretending to organize tools I'd already organized twice. "You look busy." "I am." He glanced at the perfectly neat workbench. "Looks serious." I laughed. "It is." He leaned against the doorframe. "Mum says you've been moping." "I have not." "She also said you'd deny it." I shook my head. "She's been married to me too long." He smiled. "That's probably true." There was a short silence. Then he asked, "How's retirement?" I almost gave the automatic answer. "Great." Instead, I shrugged. "I don't know yet." He looked surprised. "I thought you'd love it." So did I. He didn't push. We talked about his kids, his roof that needed replacing, the price of groceries, ordinary things. As he was leaving, he stopped at the driveway. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "You should come watch Ethan's baseball practice sometime." "I've never been to one." "I know." He said it without any accusation, just as a fact. "I'll let you know when." "I'd like that." After he left, I realized something. My son had invited me somewhere. Not because he needed help, not because something was broken, just because he wanted me there. Been a long time since anyone had asked me for nothing more than my company. The following Tuesday, my phone finally buzzed. Rick. For a second, I actually smiled. The message read, "You still have that trailer jack I borrowed?" I stared at it. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it felt almost perfect. 3 weeks without a call. The first message wasn't, "Have you been?" It was about a trailer jack. I texted back, "Yep, come by whenever." He replied with a thumbs up. That Sunday, he pulled into my driveway, loaded the jack, talked for 5 minutes. Weather, football, his back hurting. Then he climbed into his truck. Again, no coffee, no lunch, no "let's catch up." Just another favor done. I watched his taillights disappear around the corner. This time, I didn't feel angry, mostly embarrassed. Not because of anything Rick had done, because I'd built an expectation he never promised to meet. That evening, Linda found me sitting on the porch. "You've been thinking." "I have." "You want to tell me?" "I keep asking why nobody calls." She nodded. "And?" "I don't know if that's the right question anymore." She waited. "What if..." I paused. What if work was the thing we all had in common? Linda smiled a little. It was. I looked at her. That's it? What else would you like me to say? I don't know. She took a sip of her tea. Jack, people don't stop caring overnight. But their lives don't freeze just 'cause yours changed. I looked out across the yard. A neighbor was teaching his granddaughter to ride a bicycle. She wobbled, nearly tipped over, then laughed. Linda watched them a moment before speaking again. Maybe you're standing at the end of one chapter, waiting for it to keep going. I didn't answer because I was starting to think she was right. The problem wasn't that retirement had ended my career. The problem was I expected it to leave everything else exactly where I'd left it. Doesn't work that way. Life keeps moving, whether you clock in or not. A few days later, David called. Dad? Yeah? You still thinking about coming to Ethan's practice? I am. It's Thursday, 6 o'clock. I'll be there. I almost talked myself out of going. Baseball practice didn't sound like something a retired man should build his week around. Then I caught myself. For 40 years, I'd had a reason to miss weekday evenings. Now I was inventing new ones. Thursday afternoon, I got there 20 minutes early. Some habits never leave you. The parking lot was already half full. Parents carried folding chairs. Little brothers chased each other across the grass. A coach was dragging the infield with an old metal rake. I bought a paper cup of coffee from the concession stand. Wasn't very good. Didn't matter. I sat on the aluminum bleachers and watched kids throw baseballs that landed everywhere except their gloves. One boy missed a ball completely. Another tripped over first base. Nobody seemed to care. Parents laughed. Coaches laughed. The kids laughed the loudest. I realized I'd forgotten what ordinary weekday happiness looked like. David waved from the third baseline. I raised my coffee. He smiled. Nothing more needed saying. A few minutes later, an older man eased himself onto the bench beside me. Gray ball cap, weathered hands, a thermos that looked older than my truck. He nodded. Your grandson? I nodded back. Yeah. Mine too. We watched practice in silence a while. Finally, he said, They're a lot more fun than our own kids were. I laughed. Why's that? Because now we know not to yell from the stands. I laughed harder than the joke deserved. Maybe because I remembered doing exactly that once. The old man held out his hand. Frank. Jack. We shook hands. That was it. No life stories, no awkward introductions, just two retired grandfathers watching kids who couldn't throw straight. Halfway through practice, Ethan looked toward the bleachers. When he spotted me, his face lit up. He waved both arms over his head. Grandpa! The coach turned around. The other kids turned around. Ethan didn't seem to care, just kept waving till I waved back. Don't think he'd remember how many pitches he caught that afternoon. I know I won't, but I'll remember that wave. On the drive home, I kept thinking about it. Nobody had needed me to fix anything. Nobody had asked me to solve a problem. I'd just shown up. When I pulled into the driveway, Linda was watering flowers. How was practice? I smiled before I answered. I think I had more fun than Ethan. She laughed. I was wondering how long it'd take. For what? For you to realize retirement isn't about replacing work. She set the watering can down. It's about replacing purpose. I frowned. I thought those were the same thing. They're not. She slipped her arm through mine as we walked toward the porch. You spent 40 years believing people needed you because of what you could do. She looked up at me. Ethan was happy because of where you were. That sentence stuck with me all evening. Not because it sounded wise, because I wasn't sure I'd ever thought about the difference. The next Thursday, I went back, not because David reminded me, because I wanted to. Frank was already sitting in the same spot. He lifted his coffee when he saw me. Told my wife he'd be back. He did. Seemed like a safe bet. I sat down beside him. For the next 45 minutes, we talked about absolutely nothing important. Bad knees, fishing, old trucks, why tomatoes always taste better from your own garden. Strange thing was, I didn't think about my phone once. Not once. And I didn't notice that till I was halfway home. A week later, Frank asked if I liked fishing. I used to. He laughed. That's not what I asked. I guess I still do. Good. He took a folded piece of paper out of his pocket, wrote down directions. Directions? Little lake about 40 minutes from here. I go every Tuesday. He handed me the paper. If you're tired of drinking bad coffee at baseball practice, come catch fish that don't bite. I laughed. I'll think about it. He pointed a finger at me. That's old man language. For what? For probably not. I really will think about it. He smiled. We'll see. Tuesday morning came. Around 8:30, I walked into the garage. Fishing rods still hung right where I'd left them after retiring. Clean, organized, barely used. I took one down, then put it back. I stood there longer than I should have. Part of me wanted to go. Another part kept saying, "You've only met the guy twice." Funny how easy it is to spend 40 years talking to strangers at work and still feel awkward making one new friend. Linda stepped into the garage carrying a basket of laundry. "You going?" "I haven't decided." She looked at the fishing rod. "I think you already have." Frank was already at the boat ramp when I pulled in. Old aluminum boat, faded green paint, a dent in one side that looked permanent. He waved. "Told you you'd come." I almost didn't. "I know." "How?" He shrugged. "Everybody almost doesn't." That sounded like something he'd said 100 times before. We spent nearly 6 hours on the lake, caught 3 fish, lost 4, argued about whether the biggest one had really been as big as Frank claimed. Probably wasn't. Didn't matter. Most of the day we weren't even fishing. We were talking. Not about retirement, not at first. About old trucks, favorite diners, the best pie either of us had ever had. The first concert we'd taken our wives to. Conversation came easy, mostly because neither of us was trying very hard. Around lunchtime, the lake went almost perfectly still. Frank reeled his line in halfway. "You know, my phone got real quiet after I retired too." I looked over. "So it wasn't just me?" "Oh, it was you." He grinned. "It was me too." I laughed. He let the joke sit a second before going on. "For a while, I blamed everybody." "What changed?" He rested the rod across his knees. "I realized I was confusing co-workers with lifelong friends." I frowned. "Weren't they?" "They were." He nodded. "They just belonged to a different season." I didn't answer. He looked across the water. "My best friend at the power company, we ate lunch together almost every day. When I retired, I figured nothing would change." He smiled. "It changed the next Monday." "What happened?" "He still had to go to work." That simple sentence hit harder than I expected. Frank wasn't bitter, wasn't making excuses. He was describing something so obvious, I'd somehow never thought about it. He kept going.
We expect everybody else's life to pause, just 'cause ours finally slowed down. But people are still raising grandkids, still paying mortgages, still working overtime, still taking care of sick parents. He shrugged. They're not choosing work over us. They're choosing the life they're still living. The lake stayed quiet a while. I watched a pair of ducks drift across the water. For months, I'd been asking, why doesn't anyone call? Frank had quietly handed me a different question.
Why'd I expect everything to stay the same? Neither of us spoke again for several minutes. Didn't need to. Sometimes the best conversations are the ones that leave enough silence for the truth to settle in. The drive home felt shorter than usual, not because the lake was any closer, because my head wasn't as noisy. Linda was reading on the porch when I pulled into the driveway. She looked up over the top of her glasses. Well? I smiled. I caught one. She raised an eyebrow. Fish or perspective? I laughed. I think Frank got the bigger catch. She closed her book. I was hoping you'd say that. The next morning, I walked into my home office. Most of the room hadn't changed since retirement. Retirement plaque, framed photo from my last day at the mill, a hard hat sitting on the bookshelf. I'd looked at those things almost every day, like they were proof those 41 years had mattered. I picked up the retirement picture again. This time I read every signature slow. Enjoy every minute. Don't be a stranger. We'll have to get breakfast. Call any time. A month earlier, those messages had made me feel forgotten. Now they felt different. Not false, just written by people who had no idea what their own lives would look like 6 months later. Neither did I. I set the picture back on the shelf. For the first time, I didn't feel disappointed, just grateful those years had happened. Maybe they weren't supposed to last forever. Thursday rolled around. Didn't even think about whether Frank would be there. I just parked, bought another terrible cup of coffee, walked toward the bleachers. He was already sitting in our usual spot. Without looking up, he held out a second cup. I figured you'd forget yours. I was actually going to buy one. You would have regretted it. I laughed. He wasn't wrong. We watched the kids warm up. After a while, he nodded toward Ethan. Your grandson's getting better. He is. You've noticed? What do you mean? First week you watched baseball. He smiled. Today you're watching Ethan. Hadn't realized he was right. First couple practices, I'd spent most of my time looking around, watching other families, thinking about retirement, thinking about friends, thinking about myself. Now, I knew which glove was Ethan's, which batting helmet he always picked, how he tugged at his socks before every inning. I wasn't just attending anymore. I was paying attention. Funny how showing up eventually turns into belonging. After practice, David walked over, carrying a folding chair under one arm. Dad? Hey. He looked at Frank. You keeping him out of trouble? Frank answered before I could. So far. David laughed. Good. Then he looked back at me. Ethan's got another game Saturday. You coming? There wasn't any hesitation this time. Wouldn't miss it. David nodded. He's been asking if you'll be there. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not guilt, not regret. Something quieter. Maybe relief. For years, I'd assumed relationships got repaired by apologies. Standing there in the parking lot, I started to think they got repaired by calendars. One Saturday, then the next, then another after that. Not promises, presents. That evening, my phone buzzed. Rick. I looked at the screen a second before answering. Hey, Jack. You busy? Not really. I've got about 45 minutes before dinner. I was wondering, you still want to grab that lunch we kept talking about? I smiled. Sure. When? Tomorrow? I laughed. You actually picked a day. I figured it was about time. Joe's Diner. Noon. I'll be there. After we hung up, I just sat there looking at the phone. A few months earlier, that call would have felt like proof I'd been right all along. Now it didn't. Wasn't proof of anything. It was just one old friend calling another. And somehow, that felt better than winning the argument I'd been having in my own head. Rick was already sitting in a booth when I walked into Joe's Diner. Same baseball cap, same work boots. Only difference was, he looked tired. The kind of tired that doesn't disappear after a good night's sleep. He stood and shook my hand. Good to see you. You too. We ordered burgers neither of our doctors would have approved of. For the first few minutes, we talked the way men usually do. The weather, the mill, football, how expensive everything had gotten. Then the conversation stalled. Not awkwardly, just honestly. I took a sip of coffee. Can I ask you something? Rick nodded. Sure. I've spent months thinking we drifted apart. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he sighed. I've been thinking the same thing. I looked up. You have? Yeah. I just didn't know how to fix it. That wasn't the answer I'd expected. I honestly thought he'd tell me he'd been busy, or forgotten, or just moved on. Instead, he looked almost relieved somebody had finally said it out loud. I figured retirement would have given you all kinds of free time. He laughed. It gave you free time. I've still got overtime every week. He rubbed the back of his neck. 2 guys retired. We never replaced him. I've been covering 12-hour shifts. I hadn't known, not because he was hiding it, because I'd never asked. Rick kept talking. My mom moved in with us. She's 86 now. Needs help with just about everything. He smiled, but it looked tired. My daughter's going through a divorce. So, he spread his hands. Life got noisy. I sat there feeling strangely embarrassed. For months, I'd built a story in my head, a story where Rick had decided I wasn't worth calling anymore. Reality was a lot less dramatic. He hadn't forgotten me. He'd been surviving his own life. Funny how easy it is to mistake someone else's silence for a statement about yourself. Rick looked across the table. My turn. Go ahead. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why do you stop calling? I smiled. I wanted to see who'd notice. He laughed. That's the dumbest experiment I've ever heard. I know. And I thought about it. I learned something. What? I was asking the wrong question. He leaned back. What was the right one? Instead of answering, I asked him one. When was the last time I called you before I retired? He frowned. I don't know. I don't either. That surprised both of us because suddenly it wasn't about retirement anymore. For 41 years, our friendship had lived inside one building. Lunch breaks, shift changes, walking through the parking lot together. We'd never actually learned how to be friends outside the mill. The mill had been doing half the work for us. Rick smiled. Never thought about that. Me neither. He glanced at his watch. "I should get back." As we walked into the parking lot, he stopped beside his truck. "I'm probably still going to be terrible at calling." I laughed. I figured. "But," he pointed a finger at me, "if you're free next month, my vacation starts. We ought to take the boats out." "Just like we always talked about," I smiled. "This time, let's pick a day." He pulled out his phone. "August 12th, 8 in the morning. No excuses." I took out my phone too. Done. For the first time in months, there wasn't a vague promise. There was a date, a time, a plan. As I drove home, I realized something else. I'd spent months measuring friendship by who called first. Maybe the better measure was a lot simpler. When you finally sat across the table, did it still feel like home? A few weeks later, David came over for dinner. Linda was in the backyard with Ethan, helping him fly a kite that spent more time in the grass than in the air. David sat down beside me on the porch. "So, how's retirement treating you now?" I looked across the yard. Frank had texted that morning asking if Tuesday was still on for fishing. Rick and I already had August 12th circled on the calendar. Ethan kept shouting, "Watch this, Grandpa!" every 5 minutes. I smiled. "It's different." David nodded. "Good different?" "I think so." He leaned back in his chair. "What changed?" I thought about that a second. I stopped waiting. He looked at me. "For what?" "For my old life to come back." The words surprised me a little, not because they weren't true, because I hadn't realized I'd finally believed him. That night, after everyone left, I walked through the garage before going inside. Old habits. Sometimes I'd go out there without needing anything, just to think. The retirement plaque was still hanging on the wall. The fishing rods were back in their rack. Everything looked exactly the same. Except, it didn't feel the same. Months earlier, I'd come out here wondering why nobody called. Now I was wondering whether Frank preferred worms or artificial bait next Tuesday. Funny what your mind makes room for once it stops replaying the same disappointment. Thursday baseball practice came again. Frank was already on the bleachers. He handed me a coffee without asking. "You owe me about $6 by now. I've been keeping track." Liar. I have. Neither of us bothered counting. Wasn't really the point. Practice started. Parents cheered. Kids forgot which base to run to. One little boy celebrated a walk like he'd just won the World Series. Frank laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. Halfway through practice, he nudged me with his elbow. "You checking your phone less?" I reached into my pocket, pulled it out. The screen was black. "I guess I am." He nodded once. "That's usually how it happens." "What is?" "You build a life. Then, one day, you notice you stopped measuring it." On the drive home, I thought about that sentence. Months earlier, my days had revolved around something that wasn't happening, a phone that wasn't ringing, people who weren't calling. Now, my calendar was filling up with things that were. Fishing Tuesday, ball game Thursday, lunch with Rick next month, dinner with David Sunday. None of those plans had shown up all at once. They'd happened one conversation at a time, one invitation, one decision to show up. People sometimes ask me if my little experiment was worth it, stopping the calls, waiting to see who reached back. I usually tell them yes, but probably not for the reason they expect. It didn't prove I had bad friends, didn't prove people stop caring after you retire. What it proved was that I'd been asking one question so often, I'd stopped noticing a better one. Instead of asking, "Who's calling me?" I finally started asking, "Where can I go tomorrow?" Those two questions sound similar. They lead to completely different lives. Last Thursday, I was sitting on the same aluminum bleachers, same bad coffee, same baseball field. Frank lowered himself onto the bench beside me. "You know, I almost didn't come today." I looked over. "Why not?" "My back's been killing me." "So why'd you?" He smiled. "'Cause I figured if I stayed home, I'd probably just sit there wishing I'd come." The umpire yelled, "Play ball!" The kids ran onto the field. Frank took a sip of coffee. Without looking at me, he said, "Getting old's funny." "How so?" "You spend your whole life thinking happiness is something big. A promotion, a bigger house, retirement." He watched Ethan chase a fly ball, then quietly added, "Turns out, most of it's just having somewhere you're expected to be." I watched my grandson wave toward the bleachers before taking his position. This time, he wasn't checking to see if I'd come. He already knew I had. And somewhere between the first pitch and that little wave, I realized I hadn't thought about whether my phone had rung all day. A few days ago, I walked into the garage looking for a screwdriver. Instead, I found the retirement plaque leaning against the wall. Hadn't looked at it in months. Dust had settled across the frame. I wiped it off with my sleeve, read every signature one last time, then carried it to the shelf above my workbench. Not the center of the wall anymore, just another chapter of my life. I stepped back. For years, I'd thought retirement was the finish line. Now it looked more like an old mile marker. Important, but behind me. Tuesday morning, Frank and I were back on the lake. Neither of us caught much. Didn't seem to bother either of us. Around noon, he asked, "So, you still keeping score?" "Score? Who calls first?" I smiled. "I honestly don't know." He laughed. "Good. Means you're getting better." That afternoon, I stopped by David's house. Ethan was in the driveway trying to ride his bike without training wheels. He saw my truck before I even shut the engine off. "Grandpa! You came!" I said I would. He grinned. "Watch this." For the next half hour, he fell, got back up, fell again, tried again. Every time he'd look over to make sure I was still standing there. I was. Eventually, he made it almost halfway down the driveway without putting a foot down. He threw both hands into the air. "I did it!" I clapped harder than anyone, not because he'd ridden a bicycle, because I'd been there to see it. There was a time in my life I would have heard about a moment like that weeks later, if I heard about it at all. That evening after dinner, Linda and I sat on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the trees. She looked over at me. "You seem lighter." "I feel lighter," she smiled. "What changed?" I thought about all the answers I could have given. Fishing, Frank, Rick, baseball, retirement. None of them felt complete. Finally, I said, "I stopped expecting my old life to make me happy." She reached over and took my hand. "I was waiting for you to figure that out." People sometimes ask what retirement taught me. They expect me to talk about money, or hobbies, or how to stay busy. Those things matter, just not as much as I once believed. Retirement didn't end my friendships. It showed me which ones needed a little more effort. Didn't make my family love me more. It finally gave me enough time to show up for them. And it didn't change who I was. It changed what I paid attention to. For months, I kept staring at a phone, waiting for proof I still mattered. The funny thing is, the proof had been sitting all around me the whole time. A grandson waving from a baseball field, a wife waiting on the porch with 2 cups of tea, a new friend saving me a seat on the bleachers, an old friend finally putting a real date on the calendar. None of those moments showed up because I waited for them. They happened because I walked out the front door. Last Thursday, I was sitting beside Frank before Ethan's game. Same aluminum bleachers, same terrible coffee, same summer evening. Frank looked at me and asked, "You know what retirement really is?" I laughed. "I've learned not to answer your questions too fast." He nodded. "Smart man." Then he looked out at the field. "It's finally having enough time to be where life was happening all along." The umpire called, "Play ball." Ethan glanced toward the stands, found me, smiled, then turned back to the game. He didn't wave this time, didn't have to. He already knew I'd be there. And somehow, that meant more than every phone call I'd spent months waiting on.